Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining. For everyone who is new here, welcome. Hi, my name is Silhouette. I'm a drag artist from Thurrock in Essex. Obviously I'm not giving out too much information. That is really easy to find on my socials and everything. So thank you so much for giving me a chance. Thank you so much for subscribing. For those of you who are coming back, hello again. Just want to apologise, obviously, for it being so late in the month. Just been a few issues going on in my personal life, some family issues, but I wanted to make sure that I'm here for you guys as well. So, if you are new here and you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. This channel is always going to be a free channel, and just that little bit of help really does help. If you leave a comment down below, just comment on anything, I always get back to you guys, always read your comments. Please leave a like, all of it really helps. The engagement really helps. Now, for today's case, I'm going to be focusing on Ian Huntley. Obviously, due to the fact that he has been in the news very recently because of his death. I'm not going to call it a murder because it's prison justice at the end of the day. I know obviously he wasn't probably killed because of what he did or who he was, but at the end of the day we can all just be happy that he's no longer breathing the same air that we breathe. If you're not familiar with the story of the Soham Murders, then strap in and prepare yourselves. Obviously, trigger warning, this does involve the deaths of two 10-year-old children, but it's still an important story to tell. So, with all that said and done, we're going to get on to the story of Ian Huntley and talk about his background. We're going to talk about Maxine Carr, and we're going to talk a little bit about the two girls. So, Ian Kevin Huntley, he was born on the 31st of January 1974 in Grimsby, which is a little town in Lincolnshire. He was the oldest of two sons of Kevin and Linda Huntley, and his brother Wayne was born in August of 1975. Now, growing up, Ian was described as timid, he was a mummy's boy, and he was really scared of his much sterner father. His father was seen as more of a disciplinarian. He was described as an average pupil at school. He was said to have been a bit of a loner. He did get bullied quite a lot because of his appearance. So growing up, he appeared to have quite a high forehead. And that meant the kids sort of focused on that, and they would give him nicknames like the White Cliffs of Dover. I'm not sure what the White Cliffs of Dover here are. I'm just going to post a little picture here, and they just obviously likening his appearance because he is a white kid with a big forehead to that particular infamous landmark. They said he was an attention seeker. And the bullying sort of escalated when he moved up to secondary school. Because of this, his school performance really did suffer. So like I said, they compared it to the White Cliffs of Dover. And another thing that they really focused on was a fan club that Ian had set up. Now, this isn't that common. Obviously, we're all fans of something. If you weren't fans, you wouldn't be here watching this channel. If you weren't fans of any other channels, particular artists. The fan club that he set up was for the boy band Bros. For those of you, you probably won't remember Bros. A lot of you probably will never heard of them. They're quite successful, I would say, in the late 80s, early 90s. They had quite a big hit with a song called When Will I Be Famous? But they were kind of fizzled out a little bit down the line. But obviously, back in the 90s, and probably even today, I don't know what it's like in schools now, obviously, but back in the 90s and early 2000s, it wasn't really cool for teenage boys to be fans of boy bands, so to speak. That was seen as more of a feminine thing. Age of 13, he's then moved to another school. He was again bullied, but he formed a few friendships at this new school. That was due to a shared interest in video games and football. And his father then enrolls him in the air training corps. And Ian actually really excels in this, and he seriously considers a future in the RAF. And he also takes up a hobby of plane spotting. He begins noticing girls at this age, and he has several girlfriends at this age. So, for example, if he was 13, the girls always had something in common. They were always a little bit younger than him. So if he was age 13, he would have a 12-year-old girlfriend, things like that, which isn't unusual when you're at school. But obviously this sort of transcends into his adult life. He's considerably older than his girlfriends that he's dating at the time. None of the relationships seemed to last that long. There wasn't any rhyme or reason, but he would be dumped within a few weeks of asking these girls out. Now, there was a particular incident surrounding a child's birthday party. So at the age of 16, he's brought to a child's birthday. It's not said who this child was, if he was related to her or whatnot. So he's 16, and it's a 12-year-old girl's birthday party. And really bizarrely, I don't know how he thought he was going to get away with it, but he gifts this child sexy underwear. Red sexy underwear, which is a really bizarre thing, right? And obviously it just shows his predatory nature at that age, at such a young age. I'm pretty sure obviously he would have been escorted out of that party as quick as he came in, but it just sort of shows his nature early on. In 1990, he leaves school with 5 GCSEs, and instead of going into further education, he goes straight into employment. He works a series of menial jobs, but he also has long bouts of unemployment. In June of 1994, he is working at the Heinz factory, and he meets 18-year-old, Claire Evans, and only 2 months after meeting her, he proposes. They marry on the 28th of January 1995 at a registry office. The marriage, surprisingly, didn't last that long. Straight away, as soon as that ink was dried on the paper, Ian shows his true colours to his wife. She said that he was really volatile, he was abusive, aggressive, and whatnot. So in the end, she asked for divorce. She leaves him, but really strangely, she then gets into a relationship with his younger brother Wayne. And her and Wayne's relationship was completely different to her and Ian's. They seem to get on with house on fire. She asks him for a divorce, and he proves really, really difficult with this. He will not give her a divorce, and he drags this out for as many years as he can. She said that he regularly beat and sexually assaulted her. He would lock her in the house. He, at one point, cuts off all her hair. On one occasion, he beat her so bad that she suffered a miscarriage, and she was 3 months into her pregnancy at this point. So, like I said, she leaves him and she gets into a relationship with his younger brother. And Ian attempts to blackmail her into staying. He starts feigning disabilities. He starts feigning seizures. He's drooling. thankfully, this doesn't work. This doesn't persuade Claire to stay, and she just moves on with her new boyfriend, so Ian's brother. Ian finally granted her a divorce quite a number of years after she initially left him. Now, around this time, so in the mid-90s, he confesses to his mother a secret he's been holding for years. When he was still a teenager himself, he caught his father in bed with his 16-year-old babysitter. This obviously ends up with Ian's mum chucking Kevin out, and Linda actually enters into a relationship with another woman after this. Later on down the line, Kevin and Linda did actually reconcile and they got back together. But in between that, she was in a same-sex relationship. In March of 1996, Ian and a friend were arrested after they broke into a neighbour's house. They attempted to burgle the house, but due to the lack of evidence, they were let go. Between August 1995 and May of 1996, he has a number of relationships with underage girls. So what I was saying earlier about the trajectory of his relationships, they all seem to be younger. 3 of these girls were 15 years old. There was only a couple of them that were obviously of legal age, but they were still considerably younger than him at this point. And obviously he's in his mid-20s. One of those girls, though, was 13 years old. Quite quickly, one of the 15-year-olds, she gets pregnant and she gives birth to a daughter. He was then reported to the police for these offences, and each time the girls wouldn't cooperate with the police, they wouldn't cooperate with their parents, so Ian got away with it each and every time. The rumours, they circulated in the neighbourhood of his tendencies. Then he was labelled as a paedophile, he was targeted, and you guys can probably attest to this. I remember this happening numerous times when I was a lot younger. I think the earliest memory I have of this happening was the first estate that I grew up on. 5, 6 maybe, and there was a couple at the end of the street, and the rumour was that they were paedophiles. At that age, I didn't know what that actually meant. I just obviously went along with my brother and my sister, who are both older than me, and a group of other kids, and we did kind of annoy this couple, I'm not gonna lie. But obviously at that age I had no idea what it meant to be a paedophile. Cut to about 10 years after that, there was another rumour about another man close to where we were living that was doing the same thing, or called the same thing. And again, so I was 15, 16 at this point, and again we used to harass this man. Obviously, obviously it was a rumour and they were innocent. Obviously, I still think about it now and I still feel a little bit bad because obviously they could have been innocent, but obviously when you're that age, so 15, 16 or 5 and 6, my brain isn't, or our brain, sorry, are not fully formed. We don't really have that understanding. Just sort of going along with what everyone else was doing. Sorry to go on a tangent, I'm going to get back onto the story. So as a result of him being targeted and labelled as a paedophile, he completely isolates himself from the outside world. In April 1998, he's arrested on suspicion of raping an 18-year-old woman. He maintains that this was consensual sex, and the police actually believed him on this occasion. In May of that year, he's again arrested and held in remand after a second 18-year-old makes the same claims. And she says that Ian had beaten and raped her. And this was after she had left a nightclub. He happened to be in the same nightclub on that night, and they checked the CCTV, and the CCTV shows herself and Ian engaging in the conversation. They then leave, and this, to the officers, is enough for them to let Ian go. The news of this assault led to Ian losing his job, however, and he moves in with his mother, and he's then banned from contacting his baby daughter, and her mother, sorry. So in July 1998, police were notified that Ian had sexually assaulted an 11-year-old girl. This was in Claythorpes in the previous September. So he wasn't charged for this, but he admitted that this was true. So despite this, obviously they just willy-nilly let him go, even though he's completely admitted he is a sexual deviant, predator, pedo. In July 1999, a woman files a report that she had been raped, and Ian is arrested and interviewed, and he provides DNA samples. Now, Maxine Carr, she at this point was 6 months into her relationship with Ian. She provides Ian with an alibi, not for the first time. We're going to get onto that in a bit. But this just proves that Maxine just swallowed everything that Ian said, hook, line and sinker. The victim later said it wasn't actually Ian who attacked her. So obviously this is all dropped. The correct person was identified. And by 2001, Ian's activities have been reported to the police at least 10 times and to social services on 5 separate occasions. Now, in February of 1999, this is when he first meets Maxine Carr. She's 22 years old at this point. Still considerably younger than him, but at least she's closer in age. She's not a teenager when they meet. The two then quickly become partners and they move in together. Everything initially goes really well. So before we go into their relationship, we're just going to talk about Maxine's background. So she was born Maxine Ann Capp on the 16th of February 1977. This was in Grimsby to her parents Alfred Capp and his wife Shirley. And she had an older sister called Hayley, who was at least 10 years older than her. When Maxine was born, Alfred and Shirley's marriage was on the verge of breaking down. They were constantly arguing, and soon after Maxine's birth, Alfred is instructed to leave the home, which he does, but at the same time he severs all contact with his daughters. Shirley then takes the girls to live in nearby Kilby. So Alfred refused to provide for the girls. He doesn't have any contacts. And Maxine, from a young age, she always had aspirations to become a teacher. This is the vocation that she really wanted to do. When she gets into her teenage years, she's described as very timid but slightly overweight, which I don't see why that was the way they described her. But it's just obviously they put it in the reports. Every report just talks about Maxine's weight issues. This led to her being very insecure about her image, which I totally get, by the way. I completely get that. I don't really understand why, like I said, they had to put in anything about her weight issues, but is just referenced numerous times throughout any part of research that I was doing about Maxine. One thing she really wanted, and I suppose it's like a primal instinct thing, but she really wanted to get attention from the opposite sex. She really wanted attention from boys. She very rarely got this, however, and I know we go on about men being very shallow and, going on about appearances, but without knowing someone on a deeper level, the first thing you look at is the person's face. And if you're attracted to that person on pure aesthetics, there's not really anything wrong with that. But if that's obviously what you're completely going for 100% of the time, then that's when it becomes a bit of an issue. But obviously you have to have that initial attraction before you get to know someone. And I don't think, for all her faults, I don't think Maxine was an ugly person, if I'm honest. If I'm completely honest with you, I wouldn't describe her as ugly at all. But she very rarely got the attention she craved from the opposite sex. This led to her binge eating, she was self-harming. At the age of 15, she weighed 10 stone. I'm not really sure how high she is, or how tall she is, sorry. Obviously, she's quite a short woman. That wouldn't obviously align with her BMI, but obviously, I can't guarantee, I can't say how tall she actually is. But she weighed 10 stone. And she was actually bullied for this. So she begins purging after every meal. If you're not sure what purging is, it's basically eating your meal and then making yourself throw it back up. She later on develops anorexia a year later, and she drops down to just 6 stone. After recovering, she finishes school in 1993 with no qualifications whatsoever, which is not really surprising if she's going through all that, really debilitating illness like anorexia. Obviously that's going to take over your life, and your mental health comes first before any qualifications, so I totally get that. She works with her mother in a fish processing plant, but then she goes on to start studying at college, and she develops a diploma in general care in 1996. She then moves back to Grimsby with her mum and begins working at a care home, but she then leaves that care home and goes back to the fish processing plant. And she was said to be really shy at this point, and she would wear really baggy clothes that would hide her figure, hide anything to attract attention to her figure. But this was only when she was sober. After a few drinks, Maxine would completely change, and she would be in more sort of tighter outfits to show off her figure, and she was a bit more forthcoming, should we say. And it was noticed that she frequently engaged in one-night stands. Around this time is when she changed her name to Carr, so Carr rather than Cap. And like I said, Ian and Maxine, they meet for the first time in February 1999 in a nightclub. She said that she was instantly attracted to him, and only a month later, they were living together. They were telling family that they were eager to start their own family, and in June of 1999, Ian proposes to her. Behind closed doors, completely different story. Ian is just Ian. He's physically, mentally abusing her. It wouldn't surprise me if he was sexually abusing her as well. And On several occasions, she did actually leave him. She got up and left, but each time she went back. Both were known to have actually cheated on each other. The two changed their jobs and where they lived a few times in their relationship. Probably because of the rows, neighbours got fed up and, they had to move around quite a lot. And in 2001, Ian actually gets back in contact with his father, and his father was now working as a school caretaker, so he puts Ian forward for the school caretaker job at Grimsby College. At Soham Village College, not Grimsby. Now, the previous caretaker to this position was fired because it was revealed that he was actually having an affair with one of the students. Not a good look at all. So Ian goes forward for this job. When he's filling out the application, then obviously it comes to the part about declaring if you had any convictions. He puts no. Obviously we know that's not true. He's been up in court and he's had previous dealings with the police about obviously his sexual predations. But he also changes his name on the form, so he puts it down as Ian Nixon, Nixon being his mother's maiden name. But there's a part of the form where it says, have you been ever known by a different name? And he actually puts down Ian Huntley. No background checks were actually performed on him, and he's actually given the job. So he's hired in September of 2001. His employers helped him find living arrangements, and this was at 5 College Close, so very, very close to the college. He was given a subsidised rent for this property. I think it was like £20 a week or something that he was paying. So in February 2002, he puts Maxine forward as a teaching assistant at St Andrew's Primary School. And she lies on her application for the job, but the job is on a voluntary basis. In July 2002, she applies for a full-time position, but she's actually unsuccessful. By this point, their relationship had actually deteriorated, and Ian said that he had become sexually frustrated, and he actually attempted to seduce a female colleague who was actually married. And he said, obviously, he wanted to see her on the weekend while Maxine was out of town. And obviously, this woman, she says no, like, do one, jog on. Ian, on this weekend, obviously Maxine goes to visit her mother in Grimsby, and they even carry on their rows over the phone. 9:53 a.m. on the 4th of August, Ian attempts to call Maxine, but she doesn't pick up, but then she replies at 6:20 in the evening, and this led to a heated row after Maxine told him she was having a night out. That particular night, Maxine was pictured in a club snogging a 17-year-old rugby player. Obviously, by this point, Maxine was in her mid-20s. So before we get on to what this whole case is about, I'm just going to go into a little bit of backstory about the girls. What we do know is this is the very weekend that he does commit the murders. So the victims were Holly Marie Wells. She was born on the 4th of October 1991 to her parents Kevin and Nicola, and she had an older brother named Oliver. The family was said to have been stable and very loving. And then there was Jessica Amy Chapman. She was born on the 1st of September 1991 to Leslie and Sharon, and she had 2 older sisters, Rebecca and Alison. Again, very stable family, really, really happy, and very loving. Now, both Holly and Jessica, they were said to have been fans of Manchester United. They idolised David Beckham. Holly was described as more girly. She obviously loved everything that's sort of stereotypically attached to being a girl. And Jessica was described as more tomboyish. They both attended St Andrew's Primary, where Maxine was their teaching assistant. And when they actually found out that Maxine hadn't got the job, Holly and Jessica were really, really sad. And Holly even wrote her, made her a handmade card and wrote in it, "I'll miss you a lot. Thank you. See you around school. Miss you. Love, Holly." On Sunday the 4th of August 2002, so the day that Ian has that row with Maxine over the phone, obviously that wasn't until much later in the evening, but he's growing more and more frustrated because he can't contact Maxine. So on that particular day, Jessica leaves her house to go to Holly's for a barbecue, but she also wants to give her best friend a necklace that she just bought on a family holiday. The girls meet with another school friend. They listen to some music. The school friend doesn't stay that long. She ends up going home quite early. And they then change into the matching Manchester United t-shirts, which pictured here. This image was the first image that we ever saw. If you're old enough to remember this case, this is the first image that we ever saw of the two girls. And this is obviously a case that I've grown up with. I was the same age as Holly and Jessica when this happened. There was another case of a young girl disappearing around the time, was Millie Dowler. Names always stuck in my mind, even down the line of 24 years, it still stayed in my mind. Particular reason why, sorry to go on to another tangent, I'll get back on the story. Now, I was friends with a particular group of lads, and we were bunking off school, and just being little shits, basically. And I remember on one particular day, it was actually my 10th birthday, so March the 23rd, 2002, my 10th birthday, and I went out with my friend, and we were just walking the streets, basically, for hours and hours and hours at a time, and having a good time, having a laugh. My mum, however, she was at home, and after it got for quite a few hours later, she was growing more and more concerned, and it got to the point, I think we was on our way home, it was getting early evening, it was getting a little bit dark, and all of a sudden, like, as I'm walking into my road, my dad's car comes skidding out, and obviously I got shouted out, I got in trouble, got home, police were at the house, and you know, I think the first thing they said to me was, your mum was worried, and, you know, think about, obviously, this was 6 months before Holly and Jessica, but think about Millie Dowler and all this. And in my head, I had that notion of it wouldn't happen to me because I'm a boy. And I'm not presenting as a man to you guys, but for intents purposes, I am actually a man. But in my head, I was thinking, I'm a boy. These things are not going to happen to me. You know, these people are only interested in girls. Obviously, we know that's not true, but that was the thought process I had gone in my head. So growing up, obviously, any time that I was caught bunking off school or anything like that, if I was caught happening to be with someone who was a little bit older, I would get reminded all the time of these two cases, Millie Dowler and Holly and Jessica. So just something that I've grown up with, and I'm pretty sure any person that's watching this has grew up in the early 2000s, particularly in the UK in the early 2000s, you guys probably would have had similar things said to you as you were growing up when you misbehaved and whatnot. So again, sorry to go on to that tangent. I just wanted to put forward a little bit of backstory. So, like I said, they getting dressed into their matching t-shirts, and this was at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Holly's mum then took the photo, like I said, we all become really infamous with. They then have dinner. The girls then go upstairs to play some video games on their computer. They send a few emails out. And then around 6 o'clock in the afternoon, or in the evening, sorry, they decide to go buy some sweets. And quite not that far from the house is a sports centre. And obviously at sports centres you do have the vending machines outside. So they decide to pick up their pocket money and they want to go buy some sweets. Completely normal thing for children to do. But they don't tell their parents where they're going. On their way back, they pass Ian Huntley's home, and he tells them that Maxine was inside. At 8 p.m, Nicola Wells goes to her daughter's bedroom. She finds nothing. She and Kevin search the streets. They cannot find hide or hair of their daughters, or of their daughter and her friend. So they contact Jessica's family. And at 5 to 10 p.m, the police are contacted. Now, what happened in Ian Huntley's home, it remains unknown. He lied through his teeth constantly to do with this, so it's strongly believed that there might have been a sexual motive, but it's never been proven. And obviously I'm not going to sit here and speculate on that because it hasn't been proven. So Ian stated they'd been washing his dog when the girls come to the house. Some point Holly had a nosebleed, which he actually helped. He takes her aside, he helps clean up her nosebleeds, and somehow during this altercation, during this little thing in the bathroom where he's dabbing a bit of toilet paper, he said that he slipped on some water that was on the floor. So he'd been washing his dog in the bath water was still in there. So he slips on some water on the floor and he knocks Holly into the bathtub. She drowns and dies. Jessica actually, he says, witnessed this and begins screaming, "You've killed her, you've killed her." She keeps repeating this. So he places his hand over her mouth and he said her to be quiet. But he said he didn't realise how much pressure he put on, and next thing he knew, Jessica was dead. Soon, like I said, the world became really familiar with the images of the girls. This was almost daily. There was a report on it. There was noted that Ian, he was actually really keen to assist the police to begin with, early in their search. As the 2 weeks went on, it was noted that Ian was A, losing a lot of weight, but B, he was showing signs of insomnia. Maxine, she was also interviewed, so she comes home and she's interviewed because obviously she's had that previous sort of dealings with the girl, being their teaching assistant. And she's noted for actually referring to the girls in the past tense. She's on the camera, she's showing them the handmade card that Holly had made her, and she says that's the kind of girl that she was. And straight away people twig onto that. Now, many people claim to have seen the girls on the 4th. Many people come forward and said that they had seen Holly and Jessica doing this. They had seen them walking. They had seen them, laughing and whatnot, and describe what they were wearing. But each of these leads just turned up absolutely nothing. Police, they become suspicious of Ian after his first interview on the news of the 5th of August. So a single officer goes around and searches the house. He notices that there's clothes on the washing line despite it being raining that day. And he noticed that the house had been thoroughly cleaned. And Ian said that this was due to a flood that had happened, and he wanted to tidy up before Maxine got home because Maxine was OCD. And the very next day, on the 6th, Ian drives to Grimsby to pick up Maxine, and he arrives at Maxine's mother's house, and they have a little discussion by their car. And he's got the boot up at this point, and a neighbour of Maxine's mum, her name is Marion Clifton, she witnesses this altercation, this sort of discussion. And she said that Ian looked really pale and he was looking down into the boot. Maxine was crying, and all of a sudden Ian obviously notices that Marion is watching them. So he quickly shuts the boot and they get into the car. The search for the girls carried on for another 2 weeks. Obviously doesn't get any better, doesn't get any easier, and nothing comes up about them. Not until the 17th of August 2002. So 2 weeks later, there's 48-year-old gamekeeper Keith Pryor. He finds 2 bodies in an RAF ditch, RAF Lakenheath, sorry guys, couldn't get my words out then, RAF Lakenheath. The ditch was said to have been about 5 feet in length, and the girls were laying side by side. He could tell that they were too small to be adults. What was noted was that the bodies had been set on fire. Now, he said that he noticed the smell of rotten flesh a few days previously. And obviously he probably just initially believed it was a dead animal or something, but he was going to go back and go clear it up. So he leaves it for a few days and he goes back to investigate, taking a group of friends with him. And him and a friend get a bit closer and they realise that these are human remains. And he calls back to his wife and he's telling her to stay in the vehicle and to not come any closer. So the girls at this point, they've been laying there for 13 days. They had, like I said, they had been burned. They were in an advanced state of decomposition. And they were formally identified on the 21st of August. The girls were then memorised with the Soham Rose. So I'm just going to post a picture here of the Soham Rose. They were memorised with a minute's silence at football matches. And a memorial service was held on the 31st of August 2002 with 2,000 people in attendance. That's how much the community wanted to get together for their families, and rightly so. An inquest into their deaths was held on the 23rd of August, where a cause of death couldn't actually be ascertained because of the burning and decomposition of their bodies. But they put it down to a possible asphyxiation. Ian, like I said, he was helping looking for the girls, but the drastic weight loss, the signs of insomnia had all been noted. He becomes suspect number 1 from the get-go, and he and Maxine are arrested. It was also noted that on his cheek he had 3 vertical scratches. He claims this was from his dog. So initially they are both placed in separate locations in safe houses, and police thoroughly searched the house and Ian's place of work. And these searches uncovered a lot of evidence. They uncovered fingerprints, traces of blood, and they even find Manchester United t-shirts. They had been burned, but fragments of those t-shirts were found in a bin hanger at the college. Also on the bin hanger was Ian's fingerprints. So, on the 16th of August, Ian's car was searched and they found that the car had been cleaned again thoroughly, but then they found traces of earth, brick, dust, all that matched RAF Lakenheath. 17th of August, they are both arrested, and this was at 4:30 a.m. Ian, initially, he refuses to cooperate, and he would often start dribbling, feigning sort of mental illness, and feigning attention deficit disorder, and that he was incoherent, basically. Police had no choice at this point but to place him in the psychiatric unit to get him evaluated by a psychiatrist. Maxine, she quickly confesses that she had actually lied about where she had been. So initially, obviously, she gives him an alibi. She says that he's got nothing to do with this. She was with him the whole night. But she quickly confesses that she made it up and she hadn't been there. She had obviously been in Grimsby with her mum. She says that Ian had told her in a phone call that the girls had been in the house and that he was helping Holly with a nosebleed and that Jessica had been sat on their bed. Ian said he was worried that he was going to be falsely accused of this and that his previous dealings with the police had given him a nervous breakdown. So she agrees at that point with these lies to give him the false alibi. When she was informed that evidence linked Ian to the girls, she cries. And she repeatedly says, well, he hasn't done it, he hasn't done it, he hasn't done it. On the 20th of August, Ian is then charged with 2 counts of murder. And Maxine is charged with perverting the course of justice. She was then charged with assisting an offender on the 17th of January 2003. And this was whilst she was in remand on Holloway Prison. She, whilst in prison, remained in regular contact with Ian, but this was then cut by December of 2002. After extensive looks into mental health issues, Ian was declared mentally fit to stand trial. And this was by October 2002. At the preliminary hearings in April 2003, Ian pleads not guilty to all his charges, but he pleads guilty to perverting the course of justice. Maxine pled not guilty to all of her charges. The trial then begins in November 2003 at the Old Bailey, and this was before Mr. Justice Alan Moses. Ian sticks to his story that the girls' deaths had been an accident. Yeah, because that's really easy to do. You kill 2 10-year-old children on accident. Maxine then goes into the box on the 3rd of December, and she said that she had been given Ian the alibi due to her belief in him, and that they were beginning to start their own family. When questioned why she had lied, she stated it was just to protect her man, because she loved him. And, you know, they say obviously love is blind. I hear that. Asked why she referred to the girls in the past tense, she said it was simple because I worked with them in the past. The jury then sent away to deliberate. They come back 4 days later. And eventually, in the meantime, Maxine pleads guilty, changes her plea to guilty to perverting the course of justice, and not guilty to assisting an offender. She eventually is handed a 3.5 year prison sentence. They include in this, obviously, the time she's already spent in remand. Ian's sentencing took a lot longer to sort out. He wasn't actually sentenced until September of 2005. He was told he would have served at least 40 years before being considered for parole. So Maxine, she didn't serve the full 3.5 years, as it is in the UK. You know, you get half off and whatnot. And she was paroled in May of 2004 after serving 21 months. She immediately is given a new identity, and this becomes a lifelong thing in 2011. Also in 2011 she gets married and she actually gives birth to a baby boy. And so far, since her release, 12 women in the UK, all over the UK, not just in England, but in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, 12 women have been attacked because people have believed that they were Maxine Carr. And obviously, logistically, Maxine Carr today isn't going to look like Maxine Carr as she was in 2002. Obviously, that infamous mugshot, the baggy jumpers, that short red hair, she's not going to look like that anymore. You know, they would have gone through, she's gone through a lot of changes. Obviously, 24 years later, you know, she's in her 40s, coming up to her 50s. So, yeah, Maxine Carr is not Maxine Carr anymore. The Maxine Carr that we all remember. So it's kind of pointless. If you do see someone who you think passes a bearing resemblance, then please don't get yourselves in trouble by saying anything. Just walk them by. You know, what she did wrong, I completely agree with that. She should have faced a harsher sentence, but it's not going to help the situation. It's not going to bring Holly and Jessica back. So, like I said, she's now married, she's got a baby boy. And Ian initially begins his sentence at Broadmoor, which is a high security hospital. He was really isolated. Even here, he was isolated. Even the Yorkshire Ripper said, "I don't want anything to do with you, you're a child-killing bastard." I imagine being that revolting to someone like the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe. If you're not sure who he is, so he, very infamous in the 70s and 80s, killed a large number of young women, sex workers, very, very brutally, and he served out the rest of his life in Broadmoor for the criminally insane. He's then sent to a mainstream prison. In 2005, he's attacked with boiling water, and this is obviously thrown over him. And there was another attack where he was blinded in one eye, and he actually intended to sue. Now, some sources, they state that he was successful in this and he won a few grand. Other sources state that he didn't win anything, so I don't know what the truth is in that regards. In 2006, he's then again attacked and actually has his throat slashed. So the prisoner had melted a razor blade into into a toothbrush, and obviously when the opportunity came up, prison justice opened a massive gaping wound in his neck, in Ian Huntley's neck. Sadly, he survived that, and he again was attacked with a razor blade, resulting in even more neck injuries. In 2010, he was stabbed. Ian's ending didn't come until February of 2026. So prior to that, there were obviously a lot of prisoners that did complain about him. There was one person who said that Ian was massively overweight at this point, and they described him as being 5'2", like 16, 17, 18 stone, and he would stand by the kitchens and complain that he wasn't getting enough food. And there was another thing where he tried to attempt to take his own life on a few occasions. That would probably be because of the abuse that he's getting in prison, not out of any guilt. I don't think he felt guilty at all, but it was mainly probably because of the abuse that he was facing whilst in prison. There was the false reports that he was transitioning into becoming a woman, so he could be moved to a women's prison. And again, there was a report that obviously that was false. That was completely false. More than likely the Sun newspaper. But he announced intentions actually to sue the newspaper because of that. Whether or not that was successful, I do not know. Yeah, he didn't have an easy time of it. And then February 2026, so only a month ago, it's announced that he's been severely attacked while serving his sentence. So early in the morning of that day, Ian is let out of his cell. He's just doing his wing duties, and along comes Anthony Russell. Anthony Russell is in his 40s at this point, and Anthony has concealed a metal pipe with some particular things sticking out of it, and he just sees red. It's not said what this was over. I personally don't think this was justice for Holly and Jessica. I more than likely lean on the side of an unscored debt, if I'm completely honest with you guys. If you look at the Ian Watkins case, and obviously his murder was due to an unsettled debt over drugs that wasn't anything to do with his crimes, I've got a particular feeling that this was the same. So, like I said, Ian was struck with a metal bar repeatedly, and it was reported that he was basically left unrecognisable. His head was completely caved in. He initially obviously survives, but he's placed into a medically induced coma. But 10 days later, he dies. Now, just to talk about Anthony for a moment. So Anthony was already serving a life sentence at this point, after he murdered a mother and son, Julie and David Williams. So from the research, I could tell that David was a drug addict. Anthony had his own issues with drugs at this point. Some altercation went off, and he murders David, and then he goes back to take the life of obviously David's mother, Julie. Now, he also mugged a few people. There was some elderly people that he mugged, and he one of those he was actually charged with. So he assaulted a 70-odd-year-old man. He then severely beats, rapes, and murders Nicola McGregor. And this is Woodland. Again, Nicola, she was a drug addict, but she was also 5 months pregnant at the time. And the law in the UK, it doesn't acknowledge a fetus as a life, which I don't agree with, but Uh, her baby wasn't acknowledged on the mercy. So obviously, to us, to anyone, obviously that would be 4 lives that he's taken, not 3. But like I said, obviously in the law, in the eyes of the law, the baby wasn't seen as a living being at that point. So 10 days after the attack, on the 6th of March, Ian dies. And it's reported that he's still to this day. So obviously we're now coming down to today's the 30th of March 2026. It's reported that he's still currently in the hospital morgue. His family have not claimed his body. There's no one, even 24 years down the line, everyone's still disgusted by him, and they don't want no funeral home will touch him. No one will perform cremation. I mean, even Bin Laden got some sort of service when he was shot, and the US Army took him out to sea, dumped his body at sea after there was some sort of Muslim Islamic ceremony. Sorry. Imagine being more hated than Bin Laden and not even having a funeral. But the same thing happened when Fred West died. Obviously they really struggled getting him sorted. Both of the Moors murderers, Ian Brady, Myra Hindley, they really struggled with getting their funerals sorted. I believe even Ian Brady actually was dumped at sea. It really wouldn't surprise me if they do the same thing with Huntley, with Ian Huntley. He enjoying Bin Laden and Ian Brady in the ocean. Job's done. But yeah, it's reported that he's still currently in the hospital morgue. So I just want to say a massive thank you again, guys. I know obviously it probably wasn't an easy listen. I didn't want to speculate too much on what actually happened to Holly and Jessica, because A, it's not helpful to their families, B, not helpful to the case. I really didn't want to sully their memories by talking about what could have happened to them in that house. I can only report on what I can find, and obviously I just reported on the lies that Ian told. So again, just as always, just a huge thank you to each and every one of you. If you can leave this video a like, give it a comment. I always read your comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe, and I will see you guys real soon for the next true crime story with Silhouette. Take care, guys. Bye.